Hello and welcome to Itenov Healthcare Solutions webinar, everything you need to know about Unapplieds in NextGen. My name is Chelsea Grover and I'm the Marketing Communications Manager for Itenov. Before we dive into today's webinar, I wanted to take a moment to explain the process for the presentation. First, I'd like to mention that this webinar will be recorded and that we'll send out a copy of the slides along with the recording within the next week. Next, for those of you who aren't familiar with Itenov, I wanted to share a bit of who we are with you. We specialize specifically in next-gen healthcare, and we're passionate about providing solutions for our healthcare provider partners, which in turn help them to improve patient care, enhance the patient experience, and maintain a financially healthy practice. To sum it up, we do everything next-gen. We also have a next-gen add-on productivity solutions, including ChartGuard, Refund Manager, Unapplied and Deposit Manager, and Multiple Encounter Billing Manager. Next, I wanted to mention some upcoming educational webinars that we have planned for you soon. First, on June 9th, we'll be presenting Beyond the Basics, 5 key performance indicators to measure your practice's financial health using NextGen PM. In it, we'll go through how to run, interpret, manipulate the 5 NextGen reports to better understand the current state of your practice's finances through analyzing KPIs or key performance indicators. Then, towards the end of June, we'll be presenting a webinar on the NextGen Patient Experience Platform, so keep your eyes open for invitations to those. So back to today's webinars on Unapplieds in NextGen. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor up to questions from you. We'll answer all the questions at the end, but you can type them in the questions area of the webinar control panel whenever they occur to you. And finally, for audio clarity purposes, everyone's phone will remain muted throughout the entire webinar. If you experience audio issues, please use the chat box to let us know so we can resolve them. And again, questions may be entered in the questions box. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Dottie Pinnick is Managing Consultant at Itenov. Prior to joining Itenov, Dottie spent 17 years at NextGen, where she specialized in practice management suite. She is highly regarded as one of the top PM subject matter experts in the field, and thus is in a great position to be presenting on the topic today. Joel Schultz is Vice President of Product Solutions at Itenov. He'll be joining us at the end to do a brief demo of the tool that he created to help manage prepays, deposits, and automate the unapplied credit process in NextGen. So Dottie, let's jump right into it. Feel free to get started when you're ready.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I see some familiar names, which is great, and some new names. So what we're going to talk about is unapplied credits. I chose this topic today because honestly, I still get a lot of questions related to the topic. And although a lot of you use unapplied credit, not all of you were there when they were set up and configured, and there may be some things that you might not know. Before, I want to give you just a little background on the industry and why it's so important before we jump right into NextGen. Right now, patient out-of-pocket expenses seem to be on the rise, and clients are discovering a lot of tools to offset that by doing patient responsibility estimations. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of practices buy these patient estimation tools and try to collect for the services in advance. And, you know, obviously in today's environment, everybody's getting forced to be a lot more creative in how to automate some of the processes and reduce the drain on the staff resources. So it's great that you can collect the money up front, but then sometimes there's some staff required to actually manage that on the backside. So that's kind of where the industry is taking us. And I'm sure most of you who joined the webinar today are already familiar with Unapplieds. In short, Unapplieds are where you take money in advance before you have a place to put it. So I'm not going to give you the full explanation, but if you don't use them, that's basically what they're for. You don't have a charge, so you take the money in advance. You can apply it either at the encounter or the account level, depending, and wait until a charge or is entered to match it back to. So why do they matter? Well, getting your patient to have a correct statement is something that's really, really important. Statements are expensive to send, and you want to make sure that your patients are being billed correctly. So now let's get into NextGen and how, now that I've given you some idea of why we want to talk about it, let's see if we can understand the logic fully and take full advantage. of how it works. So we're going to touch on the configuration, how to use them, how to create them, how to report them, and then what else is available to help you in managing them. So let's start with the fundamentals. If you weren't involved in setting up the original system, there's some practice preferences that can help you determine how they work. Now, almost every one of my clients use unapplied credits as a payment, but just for the sake of completeness, I want to let you know there is an option that if this is deselected, the unapplied payments will be done as an adjustment, and they will use adjustment transactions instead of payments. Now, most of the time people use them as payments so that when you move the money, the appropriate provider is credited with that payment. So when you're configuring them on the transcode tab, this is where you tell the system which transaction codes are going to be used for the unapplied process. So depending on whether you're using them as payments or adjustments, that's going to determine which codes are available in the drop-down. Now, when the NextGen system, easy for me to say, the NextGen system ships, it has these codes pre-populated. But I do want you to know you can rename them if you want to. I offer you that as an option, but with a caution. If you notice, NextGen puts a Z or sometimes a ZZ in front of them. The intent of that Z was to indicate to the staff that these codes are only to be used for the automated process. Your staff should never use whatever code you designate here, whether you use the Z codes out of the system or whether you rewrite the descriptions to suit your own needs. They still should not be used by the staff for manual transactions. One of the reasons is for balancing. If you ever got a data integrity issue and you needed to make sure that all your unapplieds had positive and negative corresponding amounts, which they all should, it would be very hard if you had some that were entered by the users. But you want to let everybody looking at it know that these are system generated transactions. So again, that should be a training issue. Now, as you can see here on the right, in the transaction master, where you could modify the name if you chose to, you can also block users from accessing them. If you block a user from accessing one of these codes, and it's one of the codes required by the automated process, the user is effectively blocked from the automation. So they can't apply unapplied credits. They can't use that functionality at all because they're blocked from using the code that the system requires. So make sure if you're going to block user access that you know they won't be able to use the functionality. The next thing, and just really for the sake of completeness, there is an alert that will show if there's an unapplied payment. And again, it's turned off and on in practice preferences under the alerts tab. And most of you, if you use this, are very familiar with those alerts. Lastly, and this is probably most importantly in my mind, is the option on the statements tab. So there's this little tiny option in the statements tab that says show only encounters with a patient balance. Now, it used to mean one thing, but recently the definition of this checkbox was changed. I think it might have been 5.9, but I'm not exactly sure which of the versions. I'm pretty sure it was after UD3. But it not only controls which encounters are displayed on the statement, but it also encompasses outstanding unapplied credits. So if this is selected and you've got unapplied credits, it will use that unapplied credit to match against the total patient balance and determine whether that patient gets a statement. Now, this is an option that every practice needs to make you need to make this determination based on how you use unapplied credits. So let me give you an example. If you only use unapplied credits just for copays, you may want to turn this on. But if you are taking unapplied payments as surgery deposits, so I'll give you an example. I took a $500 deposit for a knee surgery, but the patient had x-rays and other office visits and still has an outstanding balance on those encounters. If this were selected, that $500 unapplied would offset those charges and the patient would not get a statement because it would be taking into account their account level unapplied before it decided whether to send them a statement. And that's why each practice has to kind of make this decision on their own. The other thing on the statements tab that's directly related to unapplieds is this display credit balance on a statement. Now, I know if you read this, you think, well, if there's a credit balance, it's going to show on the statement. Well, not exactly. What it actually should say is display unapplied credit balances on the statement. Because, well, technically what it should say is display account level unapplied balances on the patient statement. So what will happen if this is selected and you're taking account level unapplieds, in lieu of the footer message that comes out of practice preferences, so this footer message right here will be overwritten by this message that says your account has an unapplied credit of whatever it is. So again, that might be something you want to do. So if you're taking that $500 surgery deposit, you may want to remind them, we know you've got $500 on deposit with us. But on the other hand, you may not want that to print there. So those are decisions, and that's why they're preferences, frankly, is so that you can make those decisions yourself. Another thing I want to talk about is the security. So basically, there are two levels of security, one for account level unapplieds and one for encounter level unapplieds. And we did this, frankly, because clients ask us to. They wanted to be able to control which staff members could take which kind of credits. What I commonly see, this, you know, if you've seen one practice, you've really only seen one practice because everybody does it a little different. But what I commonly see is unapplied encounter level payments are for copays. You know it's for this encounter, you know it's for today, that's a copay. Account level unapplieds are often used for prepays or truly when you just don't know where the money goes. But you may not want your front desk staff using account level for copays. So that's one of the things people do. They take away that account level addition from them. And then if you've got staff that you're taking deposits and you want those only to be account level, which some people do, you would only give them that security. So that's kind of the logic behind why we did it that way, rightly or wrongly. Okay, so now we understand all the setup options. Let's walk through how the staff actually use them. And again, I think this is the part that most of you know, but I really do want to give you kind of an exhaustive review here. Anytime you pick patient as the payer source, the system is going to try to allocate the dollars into a charge line, right? So if you're at the encounter level or at the account level, it doesn't matter. It's going to look at the balance control for each line item. And if it sees any money in the patient bucket, it's going to automatically put those payments based on your practice preference distribution option, which I'll tell you in just a second. Based on your practice preference distribution, it's going to try to put that money to the patient. If there is no patient balance at all, then it doesn't know what you want to do. So it assumes I'm just going to unapply it unless you tell me specifically where it goes, because I don't know which line to put it to. And maybe you don't either. So we'll just unapply it and let somebody figure it out later. The practice preference that controls how it distributes the money is either first in, first out, which is the FIFO method. It's a weighted distribution, or first in, first out by patient responsibility date. So again, that's how the system is designed to apply patient payments. And that's why sometimes it'll just go ahead and put the money in here for you. And sometimes it'll pop up and say, I don't know where to put it because there's no patient balance. So let's just make it unapplied. And you tell me what kind of unapplied. Do you want it to be encounter or account level? So if you put it at the encounter level, so in this example, you can see here, I've got an encounter credit of $50, but this encounter doesn't have any patient balances, and it's not going to, because let's just say for whatever reason, these charges were put on, let's just say they were put on the wrong patient, the wrong John Smith. So this money, you're just gonna have to do something different with it, or these charges didn't happen, or the insurance paid it all. There's a lot of reasons that you could have an encounter level unapplied credit that you need to use somewhere else on that patient's account. Like say you pick the wrong child, not the wrong John Smith, but the wrong child in the family. So you can transfer this encounter level credit, you can exfer or transfer it up to the account level so that it could be used on another charge within that same account. Anytime that you're transferring an unapplied credit, the system is going to create two transactions. They're corresponding and offsetting transactions. One, the transfer credit to, and receive credit on. So again, whether you're doing an unapplied credit, this is what it looks like when you're doing the transfer. It's going to use the transfer to and receive credit on account. It's going to tell you in these exfer transactions that the credit was moved to the account level and what encounter it was moved from. And again, the codes that it uses here, these Z codes, are the ones that we saw earlier in practice preferences. If for some reason, any reason, you tried to delete. So let's say the patient gives you $20 and you put it in as an unapplied credit, and they decide they don't want to wait that long to see the doctor, they have a nail appointment or whatever, and they come back and they want their $20 back. Well, you've got to delete that from your batch, right? And give them back their 20 bucks. When you try to delete the unapplied transaction, typically the following message is going to apply. You're trying to delete a transaction that is paired with another transaction. As a result of, in this one, I deleted one of the transfer credit balances, but you would get it no matter what kind of unapplied credit you tried to delete. If this transaction is deleted, the related transaction is also going to be deleted. Do you want to continue? So it's going to ask you right here, yes or no, and it's going to tell you if you delete one half, the other half will automatically delete as well. So you've probably seen this. I just wanted to make sure you understood sort of the logic behind it. Now here's kind of a kicker. And I really should have put a link to this in the presentation. And if you need the link to it, let me know. At the end, my contact information will be in there. I'll be glad to share it with you. Sometimes, somehow, and it used to happen a lot more. I think NextGen's done a lot to fix the problem. But sometimes you will get an orphaning of one half of the transaction, and it will result in a dreaded positive unapplied. I know some of you are probably moaning because you've probably felt the pain of a positive unapplied. But what happens is they can happen a lot of different ways. Sometimes if you have a blown batches, as the system is starting to write things to the database, and for whatever, like if you lose power or for a table is locked up or whatever and the batch blows. Sometimes I've seen those data integrity issues be a result of a blown batch. And if you run your data integrity issues, the transaction validation, sometimes it'll tell you that you've got an unapplied issue. I've seen those on that DI report. But sometimes when you go to enter a transaction to an encounter, it'll tell you there's a positive unapplied, and it just gives you this red stop and you can't do anything. So to fix that, in the old days, you used to have to do a support call and support had to fix it. But they've exposed the functionality to the user that allows you to fix it. And the best thing I can tell you is there is a white paper on the Knowledge Exchange called EPM Reverse Unapplied Utility, Reverse Positive Unapplied Utility, and it walks you through the steps. And there are some very specific steps. I didn't go into it because not all of you even use it or care, but if you do care, that white paper is pretty essential to have, because it's one of those like hover over here, stand on one foot and left click twice and it'll pop up something special. It really is almost that complicated, but you also have to have transaction codes to use and some other things filled out. So if you ever run into a positive unapplied, there is a white paper on how to fix it, and it's really not that hard to fix if you just follow the directions on that white paper. Or you can ask me to send it to you, and I'm happy to share it with you. But anyway, it shouldn't happen because it should not allow you to delete one side of the transaction. This should come up and it should delete both sides of the transaction. So now let's talk about that. We've created unapplied credits. Now, how do we use them? So let's go there next. Encounter level unapplieds are visible from the chart, the encounter, right? There's no other, no way to see an account level unapplied except for those pesky alerts that we talked about. So if you go into a chart and it'll pop up and tell you there's an account level unapplied, but if you don't read it or you escape out of it or you don't pay attention, you'll never know there's an account level unapplied here, because there's nothing on the chart that tells you about account level unapplieds. Only these, encounter specific unapplieds are displayed at the chart level. Conversely, if you go up to the account, you can see everything. Well, if you know where to look, you can see everything, right? So one thing that I like to do, you may have noticed that this encounters detail on the account has added like 100 columns. There's so many columns here now, which is a beautiful thing. But one little, maybe well known, maybe not. If you right click on the column header, it will display all of the options that you have for these column names, and you can drag and drop them in whatever order that you want. As you're using the system, if you drag and drop them in this order and you close out and come back tomorrow, they will still be in this order. It is user specific. It doesn't impact any other users. It form docs for the user based on what you've selected here and the drag and drop order that you've put them in. So that is really kind of nice. But there's a column here that will show me my encounter level unapplieds. And then if I look here at the bottom on the account summary, I can see my account level unapplieds. So from the account, you can see that. When you're ready to utilize an unapplied, you can use them from transaction entry. So if you know that you've got a $50 account credit and a $20 encounter credit, you can pick and choose. On this patient, I don't have any patient balance, but if I did, I could pick and choose where I want to use them. it would use that same logic. So if these were patient balances and I picked use encounter credit, it would only pay off to this much. It wouldn't try to apply them to where there were not patient balances. But you can pick and choose, use the credit, save it, and it will apply them to the right line item and save the transaction. And then when you post it, it'll reduce the unapplied available at the level that you just chose. Another way, so now let's talk about the automation. So that's the manual way you use it. You guys probably are pretty familiar with that, but there is some automation in the system. At charge entry, the system will prompt you to automatically use the unapplied credit if you've got two conditions met. And these are very important conditions, because if one of these conditions is not met, you will never see this check, you'll never see this box in your whole life. One, the user has to have an active batch. So if you don't have an active batch, there's nowhere to put the unapplied credit. So the system says, well, she doesn't have an active batch. She must not, I don't know what to do. I'm not even going to tell her about it. And the second thing is there has to be money allocated via the copay allocation in the patient's insurance. So if it were a $20 copay for today and there's a $20 unapplied credit and the user has an active batch, if you're manually entering charges, it's going to say, hey, you want to use this $20? You say yes, and it automatically puts it in your active batch and you're done. Similarly, if you're taking charges in batch out of the holding tank, so if the charges come over from EHR and you're going to process those charges, if the user has an active batch, it will process the unapplieds if for the patients that have dollars allocated to the patient copay. That's the automation for charge entry in copay that the system should have for you. And I know a lot of you use that. After 5.9 UD, no, I'm sorry, in 5.9 UD3, NextGen added an additional functionality to automate encounter level unapplied credits. And the reason I want to go through this feature is because I'm shocked when I work with clients at how many clients don't even know about it. So hopefully, if this is something new to you, it is worth the price of admission. But if you're already using it, maybe I can clear up some of the mysteries about exactly how it works. In practice preferences, so like all things NextGen functionality, it starts with a preference, right? If you select the unapplied credits encounter limit here, it's going to default to 100. And all this means is what's the maximum number of unapplied credits you want to process at one time. And the reason we limited this is because we literally have clients with, well, we have some clients who see 5,000 or 6,000 patients a day. So they'll have 5,000 or 6,000 unapplied credits just in copays. And they don't want that many in a batch. Like they don't want batches that big. So basically this just lets you start out slow, control the size of your batches. I usually start out with 100, make sure everybody tests it, understands how it works. And then you can bump that up to your comfort level with how big your batches are based on the size of your practice and how many unapplied encounter level unapplied credits you might need to manage. So that's what that does in practice preferences. To actually use the feature, you go to processes, unapplied credits, and it launches this window. There are 3 radio buttons, and we're going to talk about all 3 of them. But before I do that, I just want to talk about the power of the right click. You know, when I used to do training a lot, I always would tell clients, when in doubt, right click. Like nothing bad is going to happen, but who knows, something good might happen. So there are two places to right click. Again, remember I taught you before, if you right click on the column names, it'll display, you can see there are more columns that are available out here that you can't even see. But if you right click on the column names, it'll display all the columns, let you pick the ones you want to see, and then arrange them the way you want to arrange them. If you right click on one of the results, it gives you the option to investigate it further. So now let's talk about these three options. Oh yeah, sorry. There's one more really funky thing about this, the way this was designed. It was designed to default to today's date. Again, I won't go into why, but it was designed to default to today's date. So if you hit this and you're trying it and you're going, wait a minute, I don't know what she's talking about, make sure you check this date range and open it up a little bit, and you'll likely get a lot more results than just today's date. So when you pick the first radio button, it's going to return results for you where the unapplied amount at the encounter level is exactly equal to the amount in the patient bucket for that encounter. So that's going to say the patient owes $20, the unapplied amount is $20, they match exactly. This one's 30, this one's 18, this one's 20, they match it exactly. If I hit the post BBP, it will put a green check on the transaction so that if you've got a BBP job that posts all your batches, it'll automatically post when that BBP job runs. So I would hit post BBP if I want that to happen. And then when I hit process, it's going to create a batch for me. And the batch is going to look like this. So you can see this is the auto applied batch 1, because you could have multiple batches if you're doing them in small batches at a time. There were 64 in my test batch that I created, and all you have to do is right click and post it, or if you've checked the BBP option, wait for the BBP job to run and it will post it. And like it works just like all other batches. If you want to open it up and look at it and make sure it looks right to you, you can do that as well. The second option is give me all the unapplied encounter level credits that have a patient balance. So if you haven't run the first option, it won't matter whether the balances are exactly the same. Like you can see here, the unapplied amount is $20, the patient only owes $3. The unapplied is 20, the patient owes 20, because if I don't process all the ones that are exactly equal, they'll show in this one. So you can just run this to do all of them. A lot of people like to scrutinize this level of unapplieds a little bit differently, so that's why we gave it to you in 2 different radio buttons. But basically, it will only apply up to what the patient owes. So in my first example, in my return, there's a $20 unapplied. The patient only owes $3. It's just going to apply $3 of that 20 and leave the remaining 17 as unapplied. But again, you can process up to the number of transactions specified in practice preferences and have it automatically posted by the BBP just by hitting the process button. The last option is really more informational only. That last option just gives you an idea of what you've got out there that's unapplied at the encounter level. Now, again, I can't stress enough, these are only encounter level unapplied credits, but it's going to show you what you have unapplied at the encounter with no patient balance at the encounter level. Not their whole account, just the encounter. So this is informational only, and I use it when I'm working with clients just to kind of see the size of the elephant, because you know, a lot of times there'll be 27 and a lot of times there'll be 2027. So depending on the client, it's just an informational way to look at things. Now you can right click and do research on it, and right click and go to the chart and apply it, or transfer it up to the account. There's some things you can do from here, but I would say most of the time people work from these ones like this, people would work them from the report. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So again, I'll just remind you one more time, all the automation was encounter level credits. By definition, when you create an account level unapplied, you don't give the system any idea on what you want to do, because it assumes you don't know what to do, or either you're waiting for something else to happen before you use it. So unapplied account level credits have no automation. They just kind of hang out waiting for manual intervention. And that can be a real challenge. So let's look at reporting on them. And I have to tell you, reporting on them is pretty ugly also. So if I run my unapplied, if I run from the reports menu, accounts receivable, unapplied amounts, you can see I've separated this. I just grouped it by source type. On my account level unapplied credits, it tells me how long I've had them. And that's what it tells me, how long I've had them. Doesn't tell me anything else that is possibly useful at all. So I have to look at every single one of them to figure it out. The system doesn't know what you're doing with it, so it doesn't know what to do. On the encounter level unapplieds, there's a lot more information here. It looks at the insurance and says, was there a copay? What's the current balance control? Maybe there's a balance control problem. The money didn't get moved over yet. I mean, you can do a lot more troubleshooting on these encounter level ones from the report. But really, there is your accounts receivable reports typically will have account level unapplieds at the top, because whether they're encounter or line item based, there's not enough information to tie them back to encounters or line items. So there's no other choice. If you're including unapplieds on an AR report, it just kind of lumps the account level ones up at the top. It can allocate the encounter ones down at the bottom, but the account level ones typically just get lumped up at the top. Because of that ugliness, and it is what it is, and frankly, I'm not saying anything bad about the NextGen system, because the other systems that I've worked on that have the same concept of account level unapplieds, they kind of do it the same way. What some clients do instead of account level unapplieds is they will create SIMs that are $0, quote, dummy SIMs that allow them to take deposits and prepays instead of using account level unapplieds. So I have a lot of clients who have a deposit SIM. Now, they may have many deposit SIMs. They may have deposit for surgery, deposit for OB, deposit for MRI, deposit for, you could have as many of these as you need. It could be as granular as you want. When you're creating SIMs, I always recommend that you think about what you want to report, so that whatever you're creating is granular enough to report on, but not so granular that nobody can use it and it's onerous. So everybody has to kind of decide the right level of how many of these they want, but they use some version of a deposit SIM. And you could even create a deposit CPT code. I just use this generic one, but basically it's a $0 code. And what I do is force it to patient responsibility. And that means it won't even try to bill the insurance. So it doesn't look at whether you're sending $0 claims. It doesn't green check any insurance. It just is a $0, pushes it to patient responsibility, and just kind of leaves it out there. Oops, sorry. And then, so what people do is they take this $0, they apply their deposit on there, and then when the service is rendered, somebody has to go back and take the money off the deposit code and apply it via a transfer process. And typically they'll create transaction codes to transfer that payment from the deposit into the actual charge that it was intended to pay for. So that's really all that NextGen offers in the way of monitoring prepays, and the copay functionality is really pretty good. It's that prepay for surgery that becomes the client's most challenging thing to manage. Sometimes they'll create their own encounter for it. Sometimes they'll put it in with an office visit encounter for that day. It really kind of depends, but either way, the hard cold reality is that it just isn't a beautiful solution to managing those prepays. And because it's not a beautiful solution, we worked with several of our clients who were really struggling with it. And Itentive developed a solution that helps you automate those prepays and deposits. We saw the client's pain and we're like, hey, there's got to be a way that we can help. So what I'm going to do right now is turn the presentation over to Joe Schultz, and he's going to show you the NextGen add-on utility that we developed to manage this. And I think you might find it pretty interesting. So Joe, if you want to, just take it away.
Great, thank you, Dottie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Dottie mentioned, we know that many of you are using Unapplieds well. However, there's a significant number of clients in the NextGen community who have reached out to us over the years for help with just the avalanche of Unapplieds. As Dottie was saying, if you have hundreds or thousands of these you're working with every day and you miss several of them every day, that adds up to a very big number. And then you just end up with this huge project of how do we resolve the old Unapplieds? And then while we're doing that, how do we keep up with the new Unapplieds? And while NextGen has smartly put some things in there that help with the simple cases, there's the more complex cases like the deposits we were talking about. Like if the patient balance is less than the Unapplied, you still end up with money sitting on the encounter that you need to go manually do something with, things along those lines. Originally, we started out writing some custom scripts for clients to take action in their databases. But as we ran into many, many different scenarios on how clients such as yourselves wanted to handle Unapplieds, we decided we needed to step back and work with several clients, as Dottie mentioned, to come up with a more flexible solution. And what we came up with is a system where you build the rules for how you want your Unapplieds processed. And then there's a job that runs nightly that goes out and does that work on your behalf. And you come in the next morning and there's batches available. So what I'm going to do is show you what that interface looks like and briefly show you some of the capabilities that are available. There's a ton more than what I'm going to show you in a couple minutes here. I don't want to take up too much of the time because I know this is primarily an educational webinar, but I just wanted to let you know if you have one of these looming projects of resolving Unapplieds that there's some hope out there, and we have a tool that can certainly help you with this. Now, the tool I'm about to show you visually is the user interface where you're going to build the rules. So normally one or two people in the practice would own that, and then it'll go ahead and execute those again overnight via a job kicked off by the BBP. All right, so this is different than some other tools where you give it to a whole bunch of people and they go work on it. What we're really trying to do here is create a consistent set of rules that'll execute automatically and handle the vast majority of your Unapplieds and free up your staff from having to work those and having to catch up those to focus on more important opportunities out there, right? Making sure you get claims money in, making sure the patient money is being handled properly. So let's automate what we can and let the staff handle the outliers. In this interface that we see in front of us right now, I have 4 different rule sets set up, and I have 4 different ones just because I broke it up by subject matter. Okay, you could have one big rule set that's very complex. You could have one rule set that's very simple. You could have several of them that are used during different phases of your project. Maybe you're going to focus on cleaning up Unapplieds first and then handle the ongoing maintenance once you get caught up with all the old Unapplieds that are sitting out there from even several years ago. That's not that uncommon to see. All right, so if we look at the top part of the screen, I set up several different rule sets that kind of correspond with the more typical scenarios we see. Now, you don't have to fit into one of these scenarios because you can build out your own rules for each of these rule sets. So up here, if I look at the one that's highlighted, marked copay cleanup, and I come down below and click on the first line, we'll see that the rules read almost like English, all right? Take the encounter unapplied if it equals some specific amounts. So we're going out there and finding those common copay amounts, right? They're normally even numbers like $5, $10, $20, things like that. So if the encounter unapplied equals specific amounts, apply it up to the unapplied amount. And this is a little different than what we saw in NextGen, where it's typically only applying it up to the patient amount. Maybe in this case, we're deciding, you know what, this is money specifically for that encounter. We want to keep it on that encounter. And therefore, we're going to over apply it if we want. And maybe the patient will ultimately get a refund back on that encounter. All right, now you have a choice on how you want to handle that. As you build these rules, there's various drop-down lists that load based on the column before it. So again, encounter unapplied equals specific amounts. We've picked to apply it up to the unapplied amount, so to fully consume that unapplied amount and end up with a credit on the line item if we need to. And then over here on the right, we get kind of a summary of the rule that we built out, and we can see the specific amounts that were set up. Now, if we want to change those specific amounts for rules where there's an option to set those parameters, you'll get text here on the button in the pop-up column. So you'd simply populate this with the one or more amounts that you're looking for, click OK, and that's really the basic for this rule. That's going to do all the heavy lifting. All right, so that's kind of a real common rule that we see is people just have a mess of copays out there. It wasn't set up properly in NextGen, but they want to go automate pushing the majority of them out of unapplied onto the line items. Another one we see, and just to give you, another example of something a little more complex that can be set up, is the basic cleanup, which is, gosh, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in unapplied, and we need to get it onto the line items where appropriate, and we need to get it, either pushed onto those balances or refunded back to the patients, so on and so forth. So we just got years worth of unapplieds we need to clean up. Again, if we look down here at the individual rules, we have the simple case that Dottie was showing you in NextGen, encounter unapplied equals patient amount, apply it up to the patient amount. That's great. We still need to tackle that basic case that NextGen does. But what if it's greater than the patient amount? Well, in this case, we're still going to choose only to apply it up to the patient amount. That's going to leave us money left on the encounter. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. So if we only apply it up to the patient amount and it's greater than, we're going to have money left sitting in encounter unapplied. And then if it's less than, also go ahead and apply it, right? Because there's balance due, there's money in unapplied, go ahead. You get to pick and build these rules. We'll work with you in your test environment to set these up based on what you tell us about your scenario. Then you can always go in and tweak them. Now I mentioned with our greater than, we're only applying it up to the patient amount. That'll leave some money sitting out there in encounter unapplied. Well, what we can do then is say encounter unapplied remaining amount, move that to the account. And once it's on the account, you can do something cool like say, hey, let's go ahead now that we're in account unapplied, take the remaining amount sitting on the account and find the oldest encounter balances moving forward and use those. All right, so a great way to automate this and kind of keep the unapplied flowing. Additionally, we have another rule here for money sitting in account unapplied, where if the remaining amount in account unapplied sits there stagnant for a while, all right, so great, you've moved it off the encounter, you moved it onto account, and the patient's not coming in, so you still have money in unapplied sitting out there you need to do something with. So we have this option to age it out and then create a new encounter with a dummy sim and push it onto that. So we set the aging for, whatever number of days you want, 5 days, 45 days. And if nothing happens on that account, no new appointments, no new encounters, no tweaks to the account itself for that length of time, it'll create a new encounter with a dummy sim with a zero balance. It'll push that unapplied onto there, and you'll end up with a line item credit that you can then refund. All right, so again, you don't have to use all these options. You can mix and match. There's quite a number of different possibilities. If we decide, you know what, we're testing this and we want to go ahead and scope it down so we're only testing it with a certain location, I can show you real quick how a rule is built. So we have the general rules that handle the unapplied balances, and then we have scoping rules that handle what we're looking at. Okay, so we can say, you know what, encounter scope, let's limit this to encounters, and we can pick, a particular provider. So now we have our pop-up button, and we can go in here and add rows to this and select one or more providers that we want to limit the results to. All right, so again, things that are available as far as rules that can be set up in the system. And the great part is you build it, right? This isn't us. You have like 3 choices, kind of like we saw earlier. This is you build out what you want to have happen. Now, another thing Dottie talked about was using unapplied money for deposits. All right. And this rule here really sets up the system to use a cross-reference of transaction code used to intake the money to SIMs for future services that we're going to be looking for on those encounters coming up, okay? So it's one of those issues, right? If I'm coming in and say we're in eye care and I'm going to have cataract replacement and I basically lens replacement, and I give you money toward that, I don't want to use that money toward my normal checkup, right? I gave you money for a specific use. So we can set up the system to automate that. So your staff doesn't have to worry about, gosh, there's money in account unapplied. Do I use it? Don't I use it? Well, we can help you build a cross-reference of those SIMs used to take in the money. And in this case, it's set up for fertility. So we take money in, say, for example, patient deposit fertility, and we'd give it a name, and we'd come over here each night and look at this side of the equation and find the lines with the same name that'll either have a bunch of lines with individual service items, or if they're all grouped in a modality, you can specify the modality. So this is a terrific way for handling those deposits. Okay, being able to map the transaction code used to intake the money into Unapplied and specify the specific services to use them for. Additionally, if you are using that method Dottie mentioned at the end, where some people create a dummy sim on an encounter and put the money into Unapplied on the encounter and the dummy sim's there, the system can recognize that too, to be able to look for kind of legacy money that you were taking using your old method and tag it and use it for a specific future service. All right, so that's just a quick overview of the tool. If you have more interest in this, please let us know. We'll be checking in with you to see. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Chelsea.
Great, thank you so much, Joe. And let me get our screens back up here. Make presenter. Okay, so again, everybody, thank you for joining us today. I hope that this was informative for you. Next steps as far as things that we can do to help you move on and get better control of your unapplieds in NextGen. Obviously, visit us at ittentive.com. Sign up for, obviously, you already have our informative webinars and our blogs. Feel free to contact us about having one of our experts review your processes that you currently have, that you're currently utilizing, see if there's better ways, better best practices that you might want to implement that could help you run smoother, and also reach out to us for a one-on-one product demonstration for your practice. So without any further delay, we're going to get to questions. If you have any questions, you can type them in the questions area of the webinar control panel. We don't have that many, so we're going to have time to get to them all. So feel free to throw them out there if you have them. And we're just going to go through them in the order that we received them. So first question. Dottie, this one looks like a question for you. Can you refund an unapplied amount? Dottie, I
Okay.
believe you're still muted. There you
Yeah,
go.
that happens a lot. I talk to myself on mute. So the short answer is no. What you have to do is actually apply the unapplied credit to a sim. So if you don't have any charges, in my example of they gave me 20 bucks and they just walked out in a huff and now I still have their $20, but I have to mail it back to them. You have to create a sim, apply it somewhere, and then you can refund from the sim, but you can't refund from a just random unapplied.
Okay, thank you, Dottie. Next question. How would you find deposits that need to be applied if you do it manually?
Well, it's not beautiful. You've got the only way that you can really do that is by running a report of all of the, let's say you're taking deposits for surgery or deliveries. You would have to run a report and an AR report and limit it to the deposit and the surgery codes or modalities or departments or the surgery and OB codes, group it by patient and look at every one and see where there are charges posted that also have a deposit posted. So it would be an AR report limited to just those SIMs grouped by patient, and then somebody would have to manually go in and transfer from the deposit onto the surgery. That's how most people do it, Chelsea.
Great, thank you, Dottie. It looks like a number of people are asking if we're going to be sending out a copy of the presentation, so I'll answer that one. Yes, we will. I'll be sending out an email within the next week with a link to the recording along with a copy of the slides, so you'll be able to review all of those helpful screenshots that Dottie put together for you. You can also always use that as an opportunity to ask questions. You can always reply back to any of the emails that you get from me or honestly anybody at the company, and we'll get it to the right people to get them answered. Next question. Is there a way to designate SIMs that would not get a credit applied? For example, the medical assistant has billed the A1C, but the E&M isn't billed. Right now it applies the credit to the A1C since it was the first line.
Okay, so not exactly. Well, that's a very complicated question. If that person would reach out to me privately, I will answer that question, but it is not a question I can answer in the remaining 3 minutes. The short answer is yes, but it takes some work to do. So I can do my best to help them solve that problem. I'm painfully familiar with exactly the problem they're referencing, and it's more than a 3-minute answer.
So Lydia, you see Dottie's email information up on the screen. It's dpinnick@itentive.com. If you want to reach out to her directly, I'm sure she'd be happy to help you one-on-one. Okay, and it looks like we have another question, and this might be our last. So, if you're sitting on a question, feel free to ask. When using the auto encounter level unapplied credit, the system has been creating numerous positive unapplieds. Do you know why?
No, no. If that's happening, that is definitely a bug that needs to be reported. That is it coming from that utility, from the menu, or from the charge entry? Because there's two automation processes, but regardless of where it's coming
The utility. It's coming from the utility.
And that absolutely unequivocally is a bug that needs to be reported, because it should not. Positive unapplieds are the bane of used to be the bane of my existence, and I thought NextGen had them fixed. But if there's something in there causing them, my gut tells me that it's not doing both halves, because remember, there's corresponding and offsetting transactions. There's something wrong with one half of the transaction. But I would report that as a bug. I can check. If you'll reach out to me privately, I'll help you check the known issues on that.
Okay, so Tiffany, again, you see Dottie's information up on the screen, dpinnick@itentive.com. And it looks like we got another one. Is there a separate security for that automated unapplied credit process?
No, if you've got security to create unapplied encounter level credits, you'll have it. That's the only security. It does not have its own separate security.
Okay, well, it looks like that's all that we have. But again, if you think of anything after the fact, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help. That's why we're here, so don't hesitate. I also do want to mention that as we end this webinar, there's going to be a quick survey that pops up. I promise it's really quick. It's just 3 questions. We just wanted to check in and see how we're doing. So if you just take, less than 5 minutes and fill that out, we would be most appreciative. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you, everyone.